Okay, IOCJ proudly invites our friend from the Jewish community, Dr. Rabbi Weiss. His topic will be peace in Judaism. And we welcome him, and we look forward to hearing his words to contribute to today's Interfaith Youth Conference. Thank you for coming.
I pray to the Almighty to bestow upon me His truth, His wisdom, that I may be worthy of conveying His message, and so, inshallah, sanctify His name and bring peace to the world. Assalamu alaikum. The gathering today is to discuss and talk about peace. And so, as eloquently a lady just mentioned, sitting and talking about peace is very uncomfortable, I think, in our situation, where while we're sitting here under a roof, the majority maybe already of the people of Gaza doesn't have a roof under which to sit.
Yes.
And they're in excruciating pain, dead, dying. It's unbelievable, it's beyond comprehension. So, although it's an interfaith and we'll be talking peace, but sometimes you have to put things aside a little bit. First of all, it may be ironic that when both Jewish people and Muslim people, when you greet each other, you say Shalom Aleichem, Shalom Aleichem. So I mean, talking about peace, in America you say hi, hello, and by us, we talk about peace. I mean, our whole life is centered around peace, but it's not just peace. We're centered, with God's help, around the Almighty. And one of the Almighty's attributes is shalom, peace. So really it belongs to God, as the world belongs to God. And we have to be doing the will of the Almighty. We have obviously a distinctly different religion, but we are here to serve God and do His will. The Jewish people, we have our covenant of 3,000 years ago, and this is a covenant of accepting the words of the Torah. The words of the Torah is to be subservient to the Almighty. That is basically what Judaism means. It just means to be subservient to the Almighty, and God gave us the Torah, which is the law, 613 commandments that we are required to uphold in order to follow the rules that the Almighty wants us to follow, that we are required to follow. And we have to follow this till today, exactingly, without any changing. You may find that over 300 years ago there was a movement called Reform Judaism. They're going to reform the religion. We don't look at that as anything Jewish at all. I'm not talking actually what my opinions are. I'm talking what Judaism is. Judaism is a covenant that we made with God. Anything that diverts from that, that goes away from that, is not Judaism. It's a godly given thing. Reform Judaism came along and said, they're going to change, they're going to reform. Now anybody who's a little bit intelligent will understand you can't go and reform God's words because you want to. This is what, there was a movement over 300 years ago. From that, they wanted to assimilate, that they should drop the Jewish garb, they wanted to be able to assimilate and feel comfortable among the non-Jewish neighbors in Europe. So they started undressing as it was in the Christian society, and they dropped the 10 Commandments, keeping Sabbath, keeping kosher, which is not the 10 Commandments kosher, but Sabbath is, and many of the other laws, and they pick and choose what's convenient. They, by the way, ironically also, is that they didn't want, when the new movement started a little later called Zionism, which means to go up and take over the land of Palestine, they didn't want that because they wanted to assimilate. Just they shouldn't be so conspicuous. Well, later, their children already, and grandchildren mostly coming from non-religious Jews, Jews who dropped their religion, as Reform Jews did, they came along and said, hey, it's not working. They were still hated as Jews. People still say, you dirty Jew, and they would go to the bar and get drunk and start spewing anti-Semitism. Basically, they came along and they said, we don't like this idea of assimilating, it's not working. Maybe it was just an excuse, or it was just simply they had a plan. They wanted to create a sovereignty, a nationhood, a nationalist concept. This was a mere 150 years ago. Now remember, we have a covenant that's 3,000 years. We spread out amongst the nations 2,000 years with the destruction of the temple 2,000 years ago. This movement of reform is 300 odd years. A little later started Zionism, which is around 150 years ago. Actually, reform could be a little less than 300 years, but basically the children and grandchildren started this movement of nationalism. We'll make our own country. As a general rule, the people who made this movement were non-religious, so it was entirely non-religious, and they hated religion. Someone that didn't even believe in God. I carry around pictures with me. Anybody can go out to our site, nkusa.org. They're making here, this is by the Declaration, David Ben-Gurion reading the Declaration of Independence in 1948 in Independence Hall. And so you would see by a dais, if you would have a creation of a Muslim state, you obviously will see imams sitting at the table. At least one imam's placed there for just for show or something. Here you have them sitting there, and not one person even covering the head by this Declaration of Independence in 1948. David Ben-Gurion is there reading the Declaration of Independence, this momentous historic occasion in the creation of the State of Israel. And here's the picture of Theodor Herzl there. But of course, Stars of David are on the wall. And they call it a Jewish state, the State of Israel. Now, so this is quite important because we're speaking about peace. The issue is that when one speaks about, the reason we're getting back together to speak about peace, because obviously there's problems of living peacefully together. So it's critical that make such a meeting a conference of peace. And of course we're very thankful to the Islamic Society of Central Jersey and to Dr. Assad, God give long and healthy years for making this. But when you sit and talking about peace, you have to know, when you go to a doctor, you're going to go to a doctor who's well known, that he's a good doctor. What does it mean, a good doctor? That he looks at a person and he could diagnose what the sickness is. And once he diagnoses the sickness, he'll prescribe a medication that should be properly, to the sickness has to do with this, and he'll be able to solve the problem. If you go to a doctor and he sees a person's hemorrhaging, and he gives him cortisone to take away the pain, and he puts on band-aids to cover the wound. I mean, he's not a good doctor, he's a criminal. We have an issue here. Yes, we have to live, with all due respect, we have to live, religions have to, we always live together. We lived in peace. Like I say, we greet each other, Shalom Aleichem, Salom, we lived in peace. I carry around a picture how we used to live, and my colleague there is 8th generation Palestinian, Rabbi Rosenberg. We live together in peace. We always live together in peace. We have an interesting history. There was the Inquisition. There was the time in Spain and Portugal, they tried to, hundreds of years ago, they wanted to forcibly convert Jews out of their religion to Christianity. They tortured them. You can go there, they still have the tools they used to torture. They burnt them. They banned them from the lands, and the Jews went away. And where did they go? They went to Muslim countries. They went to Muslim and Arab countries who took them in. They took in the Jews, and we flourished as distinctly Jewish, practicing, God-fearing Jewish people who adhered to the laws of the Torah strictly, didn't change, didn't become Muslim. They remained Jewish, and they were respected as is required by the Muslim religion. They were given the respect, and the Muslims were scholars. They know what it says in our Torah, so it wasn't that we're hiding anything, that we have a different religion. We're not hiding that we believe in the future, that God will build a temple and everything, that we aspire to return to the Holy Land as a people with a different belief in the future. But there was never an impediment to our coexistence, because we all believe that we have to serve God, and we have to serve God and emulate God. In our Torah, he says, Mahu rachum avata teirachum. Just as God is compassionate, you must be compassionate. We live and breathe by these laws, and we live together in total harmony. There's many anecdotes where every person who lived in a Jewish together with Jews in that community in whatever Arab or Muslim country, including in Palestine, lived and can tell you stories of how we helped each other. We lived in the same courtyards. We babysat. We didn't have any human rights groups, United Nations, to protect us, and it wasn't necessary, because peace is what we live and breathe. Peace is the name of God, and is what we are supposed to follow and emulate. There came a movement that decided they want a national home, but in order to gain support, because it's a massive undertaking to create a national home, so this group of people, who are no slouches, don't think they were inefficient. They were efficient in what they wanted. They were scientists, doctors, and very successful businessmen, and they decided they wanted a national home. So to do that, they were really thinking of making their national home in Uganda, in Patagonia, lush lands, productive lands. In those days, it was before internet and all technology. If you want to create a good country, you would go to a lush and productive land. But then they sat down, they had a meeting in the 1890s in Basel, Switzerland, and they said, look, where should we make this country? And they said, well, we'll go to Palestine. But Palestine isn't such a productive and good land to create it. But they said, wait, but here we'll be able to turn around and say to the whole world, to evangelistic Christians who say the children of Israel, the land of Israel, we'll get their support. We'll get to the many, unfortunately, Jews who dropped their religion already at 2 generations and they're just reformed. They don't even know what the Torah says. They don't know what the Torah requires, or if they do know, they don't feel obligated by the Torah anymore, by our covenant with God. We will turn to these people and they will support us. So they started speaking emotional words about how we suffered 2,000 years in exile. God gave us the land. And they conveniently left out our whole teaching of all the prophets, Isaiah, Jeremiah, Ezekiel, all the prophets who said to the Jewish people, and King Solomon, by the way, who built the temple, who has considered the highest prophecy. He has a book called Shir HaShirim, Song of Songs, where he wrote in that holy book, he wrote, I put you on the oath, daughters of Jerusalem, with the deer and the buck of the field, and ta'iru v'mta'iru sahav, if you will awaken my love prematurely. That God warned us. There will come a time when the temple, King Solomon writes this as a prophecy, there will come a time when the temple will be destroyed, and the Jews will be dispersed amongst the nations. Well, it was through the Greek, the Roman Empire, and when they'll be dispersed, it's because we are not on that high level of holiness that was required to live as a nation in the Holy Land. And we are not, we were warned, since this 2,000 years ago, since the destruction of the temple, do not attempt to return en masse, to create your own sovereignty. You are to remain in exile because God, who is compassionate, it's His will that we should be dispersed amongst the nations. And we are required to be loyal citizens in every country we reside. And the Torah teaches us that very clearly. The distinguished Imam that mentioned earlier about Moses, how he spoke to King Pharaoh. We have another interpretation of that. He spoke to King Pharaoh with respect, and the Torah teaches us that when every land that we go to, we have to speak to the leaders, we have to pray for the well-being of the country and speak to them with respect, and so forth. Because we are under the rule of every nation. If a Jew lives in Iran, if a Jew lives in Egypt, if a Jew lives in Canada, US, wherever it may be, South Africa, a Jew has to approach and pray for the well-being of that country and speak to them with respect. This is a requirement of the laws of exile. And we are not to attempt to remove ourselves from this exile, to leave exile, and to create our own sovereignty. It's forbidden. So in other words, since the destruction of the temple, Jews are required to keep all the commandments because we have this Torah that God gave us. It didn't change. God doesn't change. The Torah doesn't change. And we adhere to that 3,000 years. We are in these 2,000 years of exile forbidden to try to return and make our sovereignty, even if the land would have been totally uninhabited. If Palestine would have been conceptually just uninhabited, or the people would have said, hey, take it, it's yours. We would not take it. We would be forbidden to take it because the Torah forbids us to make our own sovereignty. As individuals, we are, according to the Torah, with the permission of the Ottoman Empire, who were there for 100 years, who were made of it, we may live in that land as loyal citizens. but to create a Jewish sovereignty even on 1 inch, 1 centimeter of land, whether it's Uganda, Patagonia, or Palestine. We are not to do that. And the rabbis actually living in Palestine, and the Jewish community that was living there for hundreds of years, these were God-fearing Jews. It happens to be that around the world, the rabbis and the communities, when they got old, the leaders of the communities, the rabbis would pick themselves up sometimes and move to the Holy Land because it was holy land by us. So they would want to live off their last years, and they would bring a few students. So through to live in holiness. So it turned through the last few hundred years. It became or actually 2,000 years. Actually, it became the elite of Judaism from around the world collected there. Nobody went there because he wanted to become a rich man to do business. They went there. It was a collection of Jews from around the world who were the elite of Jewish society, and they were God-fearing. So their purpose of living was to serve God. They lived together, as I mentioned, with the Muslim community in total peace. Their leaders, they had rabbis. When the Zionists came, who I said earlier, who were in breach of the Torah, this movement started, the movement of nationalists started around 150 years ago. They decided they're going to make a national home. That was in breach of all the laws. God said that we are not to try to leave exile because it's a godly decreed punishment because we were not on that level of holiness. Yes, we aspire as Jews, we dream, we aspire, we pray to God every day that we should return. We believe that one day God will make a metaphysical change in the world where all humanity will stop being atheists, will believe in one God. It says that all the nations will join arms and serve God. That we don't do anything, but we're forbidden to take any action to that end. It's a metaphysical change, a miracle that will happen in the future. That's why we always live together with the Muslims, because the Muslim people know that we aspire for this, but it's not a problem because Muslims believe the end of time will be different than us, so what? What's the difference? Whatever will happen, Muslims say it will happen like they, we say it will happen like we believe. But what it is that we believe God Himself, without any human intervention, will bring about this miraculous change in the world. Till that day, we have to be pious individuals, serve God. And that's what we did. We lived in all these countries. And I said, in Palestine, we lived as a tremendously high level of pious, of God-fearing people. And in fact, so when the Zionists came from Europe with their national aspirations to create their land, the rabbis in Palestine stood up and said, God forbid, what are you doing? We're not allowed to leave exile. And certainly, if you want to make your state, but where? In a home that's inhabited by people, you're going to breathe. What about the laws of not to kill or not to steal? What about all the Jewish laws that says that you have to have compassion? Just not to steal. Forget about compassion. You're not allowed to take what's not yours. And on top of that, who were the people who took the Jewish people in when we suffered for these hundreds of years? It was the Muslim and the Arab countries that we flourished. Nobody could question the fact that we lived in Egypt, that we lived in Morocco, and in Yemen, go through it, in Iran, wherever you would like, in Palestine, in Lebanon. We flourished there. And I traveled in these lands, thank God. You can still find the synagogues and the cemeteries. You can see them buried till now, and with the stories, we put out our greatest authorities, our rabbinical authorities. We flourished in these lands. So the Torah teaches us that one has to have gratitude for good that is done to us. That's the basics of what the Torah teaches a Jew. So how dare you, this group of people, come and take over the land from others and do it in the name of our religion, Judaism. It's not this Judaism, it's an ersatz Judaism. It's a transformation from godliness, from subservience to God, to nationalism. And all the rabbis around the world, we put out a book called The Rabbis Speak Out. It's a compilation of the leading rabbis, the authorities from every country around the world, who all stood in opposition and said, no, this is not acceptable, this is not Judaism. It's just like Reform Judaism. You're going to change God's teachings. Who are you? What are you? Where do you come to speak about God's teachings? I'll just bring one letter, the chief rabbi of Palestine in 1947. Now wait, Israel has a rabbinate and they have a chief rabbi. That's the same like they're using the Star of David and using the name Israel. It's nothing. They're simply hijacked the name Israel, which is Jacob. It's my name, Yisroel, by the way. Rabbi Yisroel wasn't stealing my name. I have a personal vendetta with them. And so they're using the Star of David all as a tool to intimidate, to stifle, to silence anybody who will speak up, because they say, wait, we want peace, and if you're standing up, you're an anti-Semite. Hitler just killed out 6 million Jews. I mean, they started before Hitler, by the way, 50 years before or something, but that's beside the point. But even after Hitler, the world is truly has a guilt feeling because they were silent when the Jews were dying. So they use this issue to be able to as a tool to be able to strengthen, solidify their occupation. Because anybody who wants to say a word about what they're doing, they say, you're an anti-Semite, you have to do it just like Hitler just recently. And as an aside, my grandparents died in Auschwitz, as the majority of my families, my colleague Rabbi Rosenberg's families, so we know what it means. We lived and breathed. My father-in-law was in Auschwitz. My first cousins died and were killed in Auschwitz. My aunts and uncles. I mean, I lived and breathed in my community. I come from immigrants. My father escaped when the Nazis went to Hungary. So basically, but they use all these concepts of fear-mongering, of that the Arabs hate the Jews, that the reason that they're being opposed in Palestine from day one. But people saw something's happening here. The Jews want to settle in the Holy Land, and I don't know, people are stopping them. So they in those days you didn't have internet, you didn't have all the ways of being able to show what's happening. So there was a few media outlets. There was radio. There was and they were well connected. So they had the mic in their hand. They were able to tell the whole world, you know what it is? A few camel riding people, Bedouins who hate Jews. They're anti-Semites, and they sold this. And it's really a land without a people for a people without a land. That is what the mantra they sold, and for 50 years and maybe almost many years. It's already 75 years since the state, and 100 years or more since they're occupying. But this is what they told the world, that the people opposing them are anti-Semitic. But just remember that the rabbis were starting to say, and they put on this facade that they're doing God's will, and that the right to the land is the Bible, because God gave us the land. And they counted on the ignorance of the people, that they don't know the full story of the Torah that says, no, you as Jewish people are forbidden to take over that land. You are forbidden to have your own state. So it is, but the people, the rabbis and the Jewish communities who are true to the Torah, we stood up from day one in opposition to them. And the chief rabbi, who was the truly chief rabbi of the community of these God-fearing Jews who were living there for hundreds of years, in 1947, his name was Rabbi Dushinsky. This is the documents of the United Nations. He said, we furthermore wish to express our definite opposition to a Jewish state in any part of Palestine. This is declaration before the United Nations, July 16, 1947. Before they created the state. This is in the United Nations documents. It's shoved away somewhere because they didn't listen to them. Who did they listen to? To the Zionists, who were given the power from Britain, the Chaim Weizmann, the first president, and so forth. But the ones who led this community, the Jewish community that was living there, stood up and said, no, this is not how Judaism, we don't want this. So imagine, the Muslim community, the Christian community, and the Jewish community, all three of them didn't want this new monster, this thing called Zionism, and this so-called Jewish state that they flaunt the Star of David and the menorah, all the Jewish symbols and so forth. They make a rabbinate and chief rabbi. This is all a facade. It's not what Judaism is. And from that day on, by the way, I will carry many pictures of tens of thousands of Jews who gathers in Jerusalem, in Al-Quds, and who gathers around the world, in front of the United Nations, in front of the White House. Not far from you, you have Williamsburg, Brooklyn. Take a stroll through Williamsburg, Brooklyn. You'll see it's the largest concentration of religious Jews, but really religious Jews, meaning that they don't make compromises in their religion. The women go attired with modesty according to the Torah. That's required. It's not something that's extreme, or what they would call ultra-religious. You know, it's nice to label people with, they sound like they're a little cuckoo, they're a little off their minds. No, this is what the Torah says. Women have to dress modestly. You go, the men dress like Jews, like we did for all the years, and the distinguished rabbis, scholars, businessmen, who have family. We don't have family planning in Jewish people. We're supposed to be married by 20. So we have large families. An average was probably 6, 7 children, thank God. And these children, we send to private schools because we want our education according to the Jewish law. So we have private schooling. How much does it cost per child? You know? You know. Right? So it costs a fortune, and we pay for that for each child. So we give our lives for our religion. Yet, for some odd reason, there's not one Israeli flag in our communities. If it would be such an essential issue for Judaism to have the state, then you would think that the most religious communities would be supporting it at least somehow. No, they don't support it. They are opposing the state of Israel from day one. So the question, so somebody with a little common sense should step back and say, let me understand, something I'm being misled, something I don't understand in this whole quagmire, this whole conflict. And then they would come to the realization that there's two Judaisms. There's a Judaism that was from Mount Sinai. There's a Judaism that Jews lived and breathed and died for 3,000 years. And there's a Judaism that's a convenient movement that's occupying another people. That's what they will discover. And it's not Judaism. They're piggybacking on my religion. They're using my religion. So when you're talking about peace, when a great rabbi we had in Europe, his name was Rabbi Dumbo, for less memory, he used to say, yes, we want peace. Yes, we want to live peace. They also want peace. They want a peaceful occupation. We don't want that peace. No. We want what it means, peace, shalom, godliness. We want that peace. And you should know, I mean, you look at pictures, you wouldn't believe, it's beyond words. The Jews are, first of all, every boy and girl who turns 17 becomes a criminal, because they refuse to serve in the mandatory service in the IDF. So our communities, they can't travel, they can't go, they can't come. You see the rest, boys and girls here. Then you can see how they're brutally beaten day and night. Every single, this is going on for 75 years, the religious community. If this would happen once in New Jersey, boy, you would have Netanyahu on a plane, demanding restitution for the state of Israel first, of course, and condemning the whole United States as being anti-Semitic. Anti-Semitic means when somebody stands up like Hitler, who wanted to kill the Jews because they're Jews, and he wanted to wipe them off the map. When they're making a state, forcing an occupation on people, and because of that, people are dying in Gaza, dying and suffering. There's no words. You cannot. It's beyond, like people you were saying, you can't watch the television anymore because you can't look at the suffering. It's beyond comprehension what's going on when this is happening. And then into that now it's 75 years. It didn't start on October 7th. 75 years and more. There was their Yassin, and we can go back before they started to come up and started with this plan to take over the land. People started being killed, and the ones who fell into the prey to Zionism, who went along with Zionism, they also died. So you're having thousands and thousands and tens of thousands of people, mostly Muslims and Christians and also Jews, who died for this purpose. Who is anti-Semitic? Who is anti-Semitic? The Zionist state of Israel is anti-Semitic. They are anti-Semites. So when they come and they accuse everybody of being when they come and they accuse everybody of anti-Semitic, it means nothing. You find the apartheid went along on its merry way, and they were a member of the United Nations. Their ambassadors was called His Excellency. There's everybody, and anybody who stood up against it was a criminal. Was it a terrorist? Yeah, but at the end of the day today, if anybody would stand up and say, I have a great plan of making an apartheid state, they was Russian, I don't know where, we were off the stage, right? I mean, and any child will tell you that can't be probable, it can't be understood. Now tell me something, did they consider themselves religious people in South Africa? They did. They were people who considered themselves religious people who believed in a God. And yet they practiced apartheid. So let us understand, it is possible for humanity to propagate, to commit an atrocity for years and years and years, and still go along and consider themselves elite society. So don't think just because they accuse you of being anti-Semitic, or they accuse people here are being terrorists. No, now we're not condoning violence since October 7th, but we're saying that the root cause of October 7th, and the people should stand back and say, for 75 years, we've been playing the game of the Zionists and say, yes, we're going to make a picture like this, like that, everybody's going to be happy. How can you play that game more when you see how many people died, Muslims, Christians, Jews, and how much anti-Semitism, a rift between Jews, a hate of Jews became developed in the world because of this occupation? That's criminal. You're taking a people's land that they lived there for hundreds of years with no religious right, as we explained. All the rabbis said this is not Judaism. Because they decided to have a selfish, flawed goal to have the land. We cannot stand by silently. So everybody, let me just say, and I'll finish with this. We have to pray to the Almighty, because the Almighty is almighty. Just like He brought an end to the Greek and to the Roman Empire, USSR disappeared, which also tried to stifle religion, and you had the apartheid disappear. God, with His compassion, can bring a speedy and peaceful dismantling. We have to pray. At the same time, we dare not be silent. Of every minute, and if you have somebody, a relative, a friend, or somebody who used to be a friend, or whatever it may be, contact them, who you feel who has power, who has some influence on the powers that can do something to help the people of Gaza. Also, they should just know that we are crying for them, that we are hurting for them. Not only for the people of Gaza, from occupied Palestine. We want, with God's help, the removal of the impediment to peace, the removal of this injustice of taking the land from another people in its entirety. God will help. This is what Judaism wants. This is not my will. This is what all our rabbis from day one till today, and we will continue with God's help to speak up. God should help. We should be successful sooner nowadays. Seeing a free Palestine, we will all serve God in harmony soon. Thank you. It's all right.
Let me just tell you a few points. Just a minute. You know what happened? I met Dr. Weiss here in one of the functions before. And then in my book, Palestine Rising, you saw his picture. And if you remember the ship from the ship which came from Turkey, now he went and he embraced the man who was in the hospital. That's how much Dr. Weiss is. Okay? Now I didn't pause here just 1 minute. Really, we have a hadith. It says, hadith from Prophet says, من لا يشكر الله من لا يشكر الناس لا يشكر الله. The one who does not thank the people who good, he does not thank God. And I am just want to say here that just a logistic note. I want to